This is tutorial number 29 on interference and filters. We've already discussed a lot about interference. Previously we've discussed harmonics, parasitics, receiver overload, image interference and key clicks. So I won't be going there again, however they will be in the question set related to this tutorial and we'll treat them as some revision. Instead, in this tutorial I'm going to be focusing primarily on filters. For the standard assessment you do not have to know schematic diagrams of filters, but you do have to know how to identify the filter's response curve. So we'll be discussing the response curves of low pass, high pass, band stop and band pass filters in this tutorial. This slide is a graph of the frequency versus output of a low pass filter. So here we've got low frequencies and moving towards the right the frequency increases. And we can see that if we put a signal through this filter, all of these frequencies will pass with very little attenuation. The amount of attenuation you expect is maybe half a dB at the most. So this could be on an amateur radio operator's transmitter, a HF transmitter, and he could be wanting to transmit between say 3 and 30 megahertz. And this filter will pass all of those frequencies because these are low frequencies and there is very little attenuation on this part of the curve. So this is only about half a dB attenuation. So the output of this filter, if you put a signal into it between 3 and 30 megahertz, the output is high, little attenuation. Then once we reach a frequency known as the critical frequency or the cutoff frequency, the filter begins to attenuate signals. So for example, our harmonics of our transmitter above 30 megahertz are going to be up here somewhere, and they're going to be substantially attenuated. So a low pass filter will pass low frequencies. If it's designed for HF, it'll pass all frequencies, make that zero. Well, you can't transmit on 0 hertz of course, but you know what I mean. If this were a low pass filter on a HF transmitter, it would pass unhindered all frequencies up to around about 30 or 35 megahertz, and then it would begin to attenuate. So such a filter would be very good as a harmonic filter on the output of an amateur radio transmitter. You don't need to know the schematic diagram. I will show you the block circuit symbol of a low pass filter because it's so easy. Won't be assessed on it. It's just a rectangle with two sine waves. This sine wave represents high frequencies because it's up the top. This sine wave represents low frequencies because it's down the bottom, and we put a cross through the top sine wave. So that is the symbol for a low pass filter. It passes low frequencies and high frequencies are stopped. So you may need to identify this graph in your assessment as a low pass filter. Low pass filter will have high output at low frequencies, and above the cutoff point the filter will begin to attenuate rather dramatically, so that any frequencies that your transmitter emits above the cutoff frequency will be substantially attenuated. And some people call that a TVI transmitter on a transmitter. It's really a low pass filter. The exact opposite of a low pass filter is a high pass filter. A low pass filter passes low frequencies and stops higher ones above the cutoff point. A high pass filter, on the other hand, passes high frequencies. These are high frequencies, and the low frequencies there is no output from the filter. So if we put a signal through this filter, the high frequencies will be passed with minimal attenuation and the low frequencies will be blocked. Suppose you had an amateur radio transmitter operating on high frequencies, 0 to 30 megahertz say. These frequencies would, oops, sorry about that, let me fix that. Suppose you had an amateur transmitter operating in this region here. These could be high frequencies. This could be in the range 0 to 30 megahertz. And these frequencies here could be TV frequencies, VHF and UHF. So this filter will pass VHF and UHF television, but it will block anything below, and a typical filter of this type, anything below above 40 megahertz will be significantly attenuated. Such a filter would be very useful on a neighbour's TV set. If you're operating on HF and their TV was receiving overload from your transmission, that's not a fault of your transmitter, that's a fault of their receiver, unless you've done something dumb and placed your antenna on the fence line right next to their TV antenna. This filter would be ideal for putting on their television set. I don't recommend you do that. Get them to do that. And it will pass all of the TV signals into their television from their TV antenna with minimal attenuation. However, your signals on the HF radio bands will be greatly attenuated. It's not uncommon for this amount of attenuation to be something like 60 decibels or even more. It's a great filter for fitting to a television receiver to prevent HF transmitter overload on the amateur radio bands. Now we did the block schematic of a high pass filter before, sorry, a low pass filter. We drew two sine waves, and last time we had a low pass filter, so we put a cross through the high one. This time we've got a high pass filter, so we put a cross through the low one. So this is a low pass filter, sorry, a high pass filter. It passes high frequencies. The sine wave for the high frequencies is up the top, so that indicates high frequencies, and it stops low frequencies. That's a low pass filter, very handy filter to have for curing television interference problems caused by receiver overload, which is not a transmitter problem, it's a receiver problem. As I said before, unless you've done something really dumb and located your antenna on the property line right next to the TV viewer and antenna, and if you did that you would expect overload, and that would be your fault. If you locate your antenna away from them and they get overload, then that's a receiver problem, and it can only be cured at the receiver. The next filter is a bandpass filter. A bandpass filter passes a band of frequencies and rejects all others. Suppose this were a bandpass filter for the 2 meter VHF amateur radio band. Well, this frequency F1 might be 140 megahertz. I know that's below the band, but it's a little bit, I'm making the filter a bit wider than the band, and it could go to 148 or 149 megahertz. I'll make it 149. So a bandpass filter passes a band of frequencies. That's the band of frequencies that it passes, so it has to be described by its upper and lower limits. The upper and lower limit of this bandpass filter is 140 to 149. So if you had such a bandpass filter on your transmitter, and that's unlikely because bandpass filters are more used in the receiver. The crystal filters, remember after we do mixing? After we do mixing we get lots of a mess, and we only want some of the mixing products, so we install a bandpass filter to pass the mixing products we want and to stop all the mixing products that we don't want. It's a bandpass. Let's have a look at the symbol for it. It passes a narrow band of frequencies specified by F1 and F2 on the filter. We need 3 sine waves now. This is the symbol, won't be assessed. It blocks high frequencies. These high frequencies are blocked. These low frequencies are blocked. The middle range of frequencies, the bandpass pass. So we put a cross through the top one and the bottom one. A bandpass filter stops high frequencies and low frequencies and passes a band of frequencies on whatever band you desire. A really good example of a bandpass filter is the sideband filter after the balance modulator in an SSB transmitter. The last filter we need to cover is the band stop. It stops a band of frequencies defined by F1 and F2. So all of the low frequencies will pass, all of the high frequencies will pass because it has high output at low frequencies. There's very little attenuation at this point, very little attenuation at that point. So these frequencies and these frequencies pass through the filter very easily. But this band of frequencies here is stopped. So it's a band stop filter. The schematic diagram. We need our 3 sine waves. That one represents the high frequencies. This one represents the middle range frequencies. This one represents the low frequencies. It's stopping the mid-range frequencies, so we put a cross through the middle one. So a band stop filter passes high frequencies and low frequencies, but it stops the band that it's designed not to pass frequencies on. It can also be used as a very handy TVI filter. If an amateur radio transmitter was operating on a specific band, say 2 meters, and overloading a TV set, which is not his problem unless he's been foolish with antenna placement, then a VHF 2 meter band stop filter fitted to the TV would stop the 2 meter band from getting into the TV and overloading it, but wouldn't attenuate the television signals because they're way up here somewhere. VHF and UHF TV are way up here, so they're going to be passed. That can be continued on. They're going to be passed easily, but the 2 meter band will be stopped. A very handy interference filter that is. Well, there you have it. They're the 4 different filter response curves that you need to remember for your standard assessment. I've not put the names deliberately on these response curves so that you can have a go at identifying them yourself. The graph, the y-axis of the graph is the output of the filter, and the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is the frequency response. And you need to be able to look at each one of these and identify it as either a low pass, high pass, band pass, or band stop. If you've got a clipping tool, and I think nearly every version of Windows does have a clipping tool these days, you can clip that with the clipping tool or some other screen capture and print it if you want. It might help you. Right, I've given you enough time to look at it. Let's do them one at a time and just name what sort of filters they are. This one stops the low frequencies, stops high frequencies, but passes a band of frequencies. That is a band pass filter. The opposite to a band pass is a band stop. It stops this band of frequencies, but passes these ones and passes those ones. So that is a band stop. This is a band pass because it passes this narrow band of frequencies. Band pass. This one stops this narrow band of frequencies. So it's a band stop. Top right, we've got, well, what have we got? It's not passing low frequencies very well, and it's passing high frequencies extremely well, so this is a high pass filter. Bottom one, got to be a low pass. It's passing low frequencies very well, and beyond the cutoff point it attenuates, so this is a low pass filter. I'll just let you look at them once more without any marks, and we'll go on with some question sets on filters and interference, and we'll be revising things that we've already discussed on interference. Rightio, let's have a look at our question set on filters and interference. Tutorial 29, and don't forget the software to test your understanding of this is drill number 23 on your main menu. We didn't talk a lot about interference in the tutorial because we've covered interference before. So this will be a revision of interference and also on filters. 23.1. In an RF power amplifier, parasitic oscillations are most likely caused by stray circuit, inductance and capacitance. Question 23.2. TV interference caused by excessive harmonic output from an amateur transmitter is often due to overmodulation or overdriven stages. Question 23.3. Harmonics are produced when a sine wave is distorted. If you put a sine wave into a linear device, a sine wave comes out. If you put a sine wave or any signal into a non-linear device, you get distortion products, and part of those products are harmonics. 23.4. An amateur radio transmission is picked up on all TV channels. Now the clue here is that it's all TV channels. It's unlikely to be anything wrong with an amateur transmitter if all TV channels are being interfered with. The problem is TV receiver overload, and that is a receiver problem, and it can only be cured at the receiver. If your amateur transmitter is not causing interference on your own television, then you can rest assured your amateur transmissions are pure and clean. Receiver overload is a receiver problem unless the radio amateur does something really silly, like have his radiating antenna located too close to the neighbour's TV receiving antenna. Question 23.5. An interfering signal from a transmitter appears on 56.6 megahertz. This could be due to, well, a 10 metre transmission is around 28 to 29.5 megahertz, and that's half of that frequency, so this could only be the second harmonic of a 10 metre amateur transmission. Question 23.6. Parasitic oscillations are suppressed by, well, they're caused by unwanted resonant circuits in a transmitter, so removing those unwanted resonant circuits would cure the parasitic oscillation. A radio amateur uses a dip oscillator with the transmitter turned off. If he's got a parasitic and he knows the frequency of the parasitic, and he usually does because other radio amateurs have told him, he would then turn the transmitter off, take the covers off, use a dip oscillator, move it around until he got a dip on that frequency, and then he would know where the unwanted resonant circuit was. That's not a need to know, just something of interest for you there. 23.7. Parasitic oscillations are usually generated by excessive drive or accidental resonant excuse me. accidental resonant frequencies in a power amplifier would cause parasitic oscillation, radiation, Excessive drive or excitation could cause harmonics. Overmodulating would cause harmonics. But parasitics are caused by stray circuit inductance and capacitance forming unwanted resonant frequencies. Question 23.8. When an audio amplifier is overloaded from a high frequency transmission, it can, when an audio amplifier is overloaded, it becomes nonlinear, and because it's nonlinear, it becomes a demodulator. So an overloaded audio amplifier can demodulate radio signals. That explains why devices such as clock radios, which aren't supposed to pick up radio signals, do if they're overloaded, because the audio amplifier in them becomes overloaded, and the overloaded audio amplifier then becomes a demodulator. 23.9. Image interference in communications receiver is caused by a signal operating on twice the intermediate frequency away from the desired signal. And we covered IF interference earlier on, intermediate frequency interference. If you're not understanding that, you should go back and have a look at the tutorial where we talked about that. 23.10. Image interference affects mainly superheterodyne receivers. So if you're scratchy on it, go back and look at SSB receivers or receivers in general, the tutorial on that, and we go over image interference there. 23.11. A TV system is experiencing interference on most channels from a HF amateur transmission. All channels, on most channels, okay? So it's only most channels. It's not all channels, so it's probably not going to be overload, but it could be TV masthead amplifier overload. The masthead amplifier is that little amplifier up the top of the mast where the TV antenna is. They usually have a gain from 20 to 40 decibels. They're usually not particularly good amplifiers. They're not shielded very well. And even though you're not overloading the TV receiver, you could very well be overloading that amplifier, and that would be causing interference on the television set. Question 23.12. A selective network which allows some frequencies to pass through while attenuating other frequencies is called a filter. 23.13. The best method of eliminating TV set front-end overload caused by proximity to a 10-metre amateur transmitter is to install a high-pass filter on the TV. A high-pass filter will pass the television signals, which are on VHF and UHF, and it will stop the HF signals up to about 34-35 megahertz from an amateur transmitter. 23.14. This diagram represents the frequency response. Oh, there's a typo there. Let me just fix that. And still a typo there. Frequency response, it should say. What sort of filter is this? Low frequencies are being blocked, high frequencies are being blocked, and a small band of frequencies is being passed. So this has to be a bandpass filter. 23.15. Television interference caused by harmonics radiated from an amateur transmitter could be eliminated by, well, we're getting harmonics from the transmitter, that's multiples of the transmit frequency. So we want to pass the low transmit frequency and stop the high frequency harmonics. You would put a low pass filter at the transmitter output. 23.16. A filter used to suppress unwanted harmonics is the low pass filter. 23.17. This diagram represents, okay, we're stopping these ones, we're stopping those ones, we're passing these ones. So we've got a middle band of frequencies which is getting through. Higher ones are stopped, lower ones are stopped. So this has to be a bandpass filter. Question 2318. This diagram represents the filter response curve of A. Well, let's have a look at it. We've got output, a lot of output here at low frequencies. We've got a lot of output here at high frequencies, but we have a band of frequencies where we have no output. So these are being stopped. So this has to be a band stop filter. The diagram represents the frequency response curve of the low frequencies are being passed and the higher frequencies are being stopped. So this is a low pass filter. 2320. The filter best suited to suppress harmonics of a transmitter's output is a low-pass radio frequency filter. Wouldn't be a low-pass audio frequency filter, because we want to pass our transmitter frequencies, which are radio frequency. 2321. One function of the output stage coupling network of a transmitter is to, that's a pi or L coupling network in the output of a transmitter. It does match impedance, but it also reduces harmonic radiation because that filter in the output coupling network is a low-pass filter. 2322. A circuit designed to pass minimum attenuation of all frequencies above a certain value and to attenuate signals of a lower frequency is called a high-pass filter. So it's passing high frequencies with minimum attenuation and attenuating low frequencies, so it's a high-pass filter. The best method of eliminating TV set front-end overload caused by proximity to an 80, 15 and 10 metre ammeter transmitter is to overload to a receiver, install a high-pass filter on the TV receiver, which passes the high TV frequencies on VHF and UHF and stops the entry into the receiver of a HF ammeter radio transmitter. Last question, 2324. A radio frequency bypass capacitor. Well, of course it passes radio frequencies and blocks DC or lower frequencies. That could have just as easily says blocks audio frequencies and passes radio frequencies. An RF bypass capacitor passes radio frequencies. Well, that's it for tutorial 29. Don't forget, self-test, drill number 23. Scoring well with drill number 23, then progress onwards to the next tutorial. Thanks for your attention. Catch you next time. This is Ron, VK2DQ. Cheers for now.